The sun sets over fields that have been worked the same way for generations. Shadows lengthen across dirt paths connecting small clusters of wooden structures. Smoke rises from cooking fires in steady, thin columns toward a darkening sky. People move slowly between doorways, carrying buckets or bundles of gathered wood. The air smells faintly of earth, animals, and burning wood from hearths. Voices are low and infrequent, exchanged in brief phrases about tomorrow's tasks. Children are called inside as the light fades to a pale gray. Dogs settle near doorways, watching the last movements of the day. The rhythm of the evening is familiar and occurs without planning or discussion. Doors are pulled closed against the cooling air but not latched tightly. Shutters are adjusted to block wind but allow some ventilation through narrow gaps. Inside, floors are packed dirt or worn stone, uneven from years of use. Walls are timber or wattle and daub, patched where cracks have appeared. Roofs are thatch, maintained each season to prevent leaks during rain. Furniture is minimal, a table, a few stools, perhaps a chest for storage. Beds are straw mattresses on wooden frames or platforms built into corners. Blankets are wool, heavy and coarse, layered according to the season. Light comes from small fires or rush lights dipped in fat. Flames flicker and provide enough glow to see shapes and outlines clearly. Meals are prepared in iron pots suspended over fires on hooks or trivets. Ingredients are simple and available from nearby land or stored from earlier harvests. Bread is dark and dense, baked in communal ovens or on hearthstones. Porridge is made from grains boiled with water or milk until soft. Vegetables are added when available, often turnips, onions, or cabbage from small gardens. Meat is eaten infrequently, preserved with salt or smoke for use throughout winter. Meals are eaten from wooden bowls with wooden spoons or torn bread. Portions are modest and distributed according to age and labor responsibilities. Eating happens quietly, with little conversation, and finishes when bowls are emptied. After eating, tools are inspected and set aside for the next morning's work. Axes, hoes, and sickles are checked for damage or wear. Repairs are noted but often postponed until a later day when time allows. Firewood is stacked near hearths to dry and remain accessible during the night. Water containers are refilled from wells or streams for use the following day. Animals are checked one last time before full darkness settles over the land. Chickens roost in small coops or corners of sheds away from predators. Goats or pigs are enclosed in pens with simple fences or barriers. Larger animals, if present, stand quietly in shelters built from timber and thatch. The village grows still as people settle into their homes for the night. Movement becomes rare and limited to necessary adjustments of fires or blankets. The sounds of the day fade into silence broken only by occasional animal noises. Darkness deepens and the routines of evening give way to rest and stillness. Morning begins when the first light appears over the horizon in gradual degrees. People wake without clocks, guided by the changing quality of darkness outside. There is no sudden transition, only a slow awareness that another day has started. Blankets are pushed aside and feet touch cold floors in the same motion. Bodies move stiffly at first, adjusting to wakefulness through familiar movements and stretches. Clothing is pulled on in layers, the same garments worn yesterday and before. Faces are splashed with water from buckets filled the night before and left standing. Hair is smoothed or tied back with strips of cloth or leather. The process is efficient and requires little thought or variation from day to day. Fires are rekindled from embers banked under ash the previous evening before sleep. Kindling is added in small amounts, then larger pieces of wood once flames appear. The fire grows slowly and begins to warm the air near the hearth. Water is set to heat in pots for washing and for preparing morning food. Porridge is started with grains measured by hand and poured into boiling water. The mixture is stirred occasionally with wooden paddles to prevent sticking or burning. Bread from the day before is eaten if available, torn into pieces and dipped. Morning meals are simple and eaten quickly to allow time for the day's work. Children are woken and dressed by mothers or older siblings in the same order. They eat smaller portions of the same food prepared for adults without complaint. Younger children stay near the hearth while older ones prepare to help with tasks. Boys fetch water or gather additional firewood from piles stacked outside under shelters. Girls help with food preparation or tend to younger siblings while mothers work. Instructions are brief and given in calm, direct phrases repeated many times before. Children respond with nods or single words and begin their tasks immediately. The morning routine unfolds in the same sequence day after day without discussion. Men leave home shortly after eating to begin work in fields or workshops. They carry tools appropriate to the season and the work planned for that day. Walking to fields follows paths worn smooth by years of identical journeys each morning. The landscape is familiar in every detail: trees, rocks, boundaries between properties, distant hills. Weather is noted but does not usually alter plans unless conditions are severe. Light rain is common and work continues with hoods pulled over heads for protection. Wind is constant in open areas and clothes are layered to provide warmth. The ground underfoot is soft or hard depending on recent rainfall and temperature. Fields are divided into strips worked by individual families according to long-established agreements. Boundaries are marked by furrows or stones and are not disputed in most cases. Soil is turned with wooden plows pulled by oxen or by hand tools. The work is slow and repetitive, moving across the same ground season after season. Seeds are scattered by hand in patterns learned from fathers and grandfathers before them. Rows are spaced according to tradition rather than measurement or written instruction. The process requires attention but not constant thought, allowing the mind to rest. Plowing continues until the assigned area is covered or until the light begins to fade. Breaks are taken when the body requires rest or when animals need water. Food brought from home is eaten while standing or sitting on stones at field edges. Bread, cheese, and dried meat are common and provide energy to continue working. Water is carried in leather flasks or pottery jugs and drunk throughout the day. Conversations between workers are infrequent and focus on immediate tasks or observations about weather. Laughter is rare and humor is dry and understated when it occurs at all. Women remain near homes to manage tasks that do not require traveling to distant fields. Water is drawn from wells using ropes and wooden buckets lowered and raised repeatedly. The water is carried back to homes in containers balanced on hips or shoulders. Multiple trips are made each day to ensure enough water for cooking, washing, and animals. Muscles adapt to the weight and the motion becomes automatic over time and repetition. Wells are shared among several households and brief exchanges occur while waiting turns. Information is passed about illnesses, births, or tasks requiring communal effort in coming days. Laundry is done in streams or large wooden tubs filled with heated water. Garments are soaked, scrubbed against stones, and wrung by hand to remove moisture. The process is repeated for each item until the available clothing is cleaned. Wet garments are draped over bushes, fences, or ropes to dry in air and sun. Drying times vary depending on wind and humidity but are rarely fast or predictable. Clothing is collected once dry and folded or stored until needed again for wearing. The cycle repeats according to need and the availability of time and weather conditions. Food preparation occupies much of the remaining time available during daylight hours. Vegetables are cleaned, peeled, and chopped on wooden boards using knives sharpened regularly on stones. Grains are ground in hand mills, a task requiring strength and patience and time. Flour is sifted to remove larger pieces of chaff or debris before being stored. Bread dough is kneaded by hand until the texture is consistent and smooth. Loaves are shaped and left to rise in warm areas near hearths before baking. The process is long and cannot be rushed without affecting the final result noticeably. Animals require feeding and care at intervals throughout the day without exception or delay. Chickens are given scattered grain and scraps from food preparation and leftover meals. Pigs are fed kitchen waste, spoiled vegetables, and anything else no longer suitable for humans. Goats are led to areas with grass or brush and watched to prevent wandering. Milk is collected from goats in wooden pails and strained through cloth into containers. The milk is used immediately or stored in cool areas to delay souring. Eggs are gathered from nesting areas and checked for cracks or other damage before storing. Children play near homes in spaces between work tasks assigned to them by adults. Games are simple and involve running, throwing stones, or mimicking adult work with sticks. Imagination is present, but toys are few and made from natural materials at hand. Play is interrupted frequently for chores and resumes afterward without complaint or resistance. Older children watch younger ones and intervene when disputes arise over rules or turns. The games are passed down and played the same way across many generations. Time is not tracked and play ends when called or when hunger or tiredness ends it. Afternoon continues in the same pattern established during the morning hours without significant change. Tasks overlap and some are repeated as needed or as conditions require adjustment. Fires are maintained at steady levels, neither too large nor allowed to die completely. Water is checked and replenished when buckets or pots run low from use. Bread bakes and the smell fills the air near homes in familiar, comforting patterns. Conversations remain brief and practical, focused on what needs doing next or soon. The rhythm of work is steady and unvaried, creating a sense of continuity. Each action flows into the next without pause or consideration of alternatives or changes. Tools are cleaned after use and returned to the same places they occupy each night. Dirt is brushed from metal surfaces to prevent rust from forming over time. Wooden handles are checked for splinters or cracks that might worsen with continued use. Repairs are noted mentally but often postponed until a later day when time permits. Oil or fat is rubbed into leather straps to keep them supple and functional. Sharpening stones are used on blades that have dulled from repeated contact with soil. The maintenance is routine and performed without thought of its necessity or importance to continuation. Straw is gathered and spread in areas where animals sleep to provide softness and warmth. Old straw is removed when it becomes soiled and composted in piles behind structures. The new straw is laid down in even layers and patted flat with hands. Animals settle into these areas at the end of each day in predictable patterns. The same corners are chosen night after night by the same animals repeatedly. Observation of these habits occurs but does not prompt comment or adjustment from caretakers. The patterns continue unchanged across seasons and years without documented record or deliberate planning. Evening meals are prepared using ingredients gathered or stored from previous days and weeks. Pots are filled with water and set over fires to reach boiling temperatures. Vegetables are added in no particular order, whatever is available from gardens or storage. Onions, turnips, and cabbage are common and require little preparation beyond washing and cutting. Grains are added to thicken the mixture and provide substance to the meal. Salt is used sparingly, measured by pinches rather than specific amounts or measurements. Herbs grow near doorways and are picked fresh when needed for flavoring or preservation. The cooking process is slow and allows time for other tasks to be completed. Stirring happens at intervals to prevent food from sticking to the bottom of pots. Wooden spoons are used, darkened from smoke and repeated use over many years. The same spoons are used by mothers and grandmothers before them without replacement. Handles are worn smooth from hands gripping them in the same places repeatedly. Cracks appear over time but do not render the tools unusable in most cases. Meals bubble gently and fill the air with steam and familiar sense of cooking. Lids are lifted to check progress and replaced to retain heat within the pots. The process requires minimal attention once the fire is set at the correct level. Bread is removed from ovens or hearthstones when the crust becomes firm and lightly browned. The loaves are tapped on the bottom to check for a hollow sound. This indicates proper baking and readiness to be removed from heat and cooled. Bread is set on wooden boards or stone surfaces to cool before being cut. Heat radiates from the loaves and the smell spreads through the room and beyond. Cutting is done with knives kept sharp for this purpose and for other food tasks. Slices are uneven but adequate for the purpose of serving and eating with meals. Crumbs fall onto boards and are collected for use in other dishes later. Tables are set with bowls and spoons in the same arrangement used every evening. Wooden surfaces are wiped clean with damp cloths before food is placed on them. Benches are positioned around tables to accommodate the number of people in the household. Seating follows the same pattern each night without discussion or assignment of specific places. Adults sit first, followed by older children, then younger ones in descending order. Bowls are filled from pots using ladles and passed to each person in turn. Portions are distributed based on age and the work performed during the day. No one takes more than their share or questions the amounts given to them. Eating proceeds quietly with attention focused on the food rather than on conversation. Spoons move from bowls to mouths in steady rhythms until the contents are consumed. Bread is torn and used to soak up remaining liquid from the bottom of bowls. Chewing is thorough and unhurried, allowing time for the body to register fullness. Children finish first and wait silently for adults to complete their meals before moving. Bowls are stacked when empty and set aside for washing after everyone has finished. Water is drunk from shared cups passed around the table as needed during eating. Washing is done in basins filled with water heated over the fire during meal preparation. Bowls and spoons are scrubbed with cloths or handfuls of straw to remove food residue. Water becomes cloudy and is changed when it no longer cleans the items effectively. Clean items are set on cloths to dry overnight near the warmth of the hearth. Pots used for cooking are scraped clean and wiped out with damp rags or straw. Large pots are heavy and require 2 hands to lift and maneuver safely. They are returned to hooks or placed beside the hearth for use the next day. The routine is performed without variation and takes the same amount of time each evening. Floors are swept with brooms made from bundled twigs tied to wooden handles with cord. Dirt, crumbs, and debris are pushed toward doorways and swept outside into the darkness. Sweeping happens every evening regardless of the visible amount of dirt or mess present. The motion is familiar and requires no thought beyond the repetition of strokes. Brooms wear down over time and are replaced when the twigs become too short. New brooms are made during slow periods using materials gathered from nearby wooded areas. The process of making brooms is simple and learned by observation rather than instruction. Animals are checked one final time before full darkness settles over the surrounding landscape. Chickens are counted and shutters on coops are closed to protect them from predators. Pigs are given a final scattering of scraps if any remain from the meal. Goats are secured in pens with gates fastened using simple wooden latches or ropes. Larger animals are led into shelters if they have not already entered on their own. Bedding is checked and adjusted if it has been displaced during the day. Water troughs are refilled to ensure animals have access throughout the night ahead. These tasks are completed quickly and without lingering or unnecessary observation of the animals. Firewood is brought inside and stacked within easy reach of the hearth for nighttime use. Logs are arranged by size with smaller pieces on top for quick access. The stack is built against a wall or in a corner where it will not obstruct movement. Bark and loose debris fall away during handling and are swept up afterward. Hands become rough and stained from handling wood repeatedly throughout each day and season. Splinters are common and removed with fingernails or the tips of knives when noticed. The work is routine and does not prompt complaint or comment from those performing it. Clothing is checked for damage or wear that might require mending before the next use. Tiers are noted and set aside for repair during daylight hours when visibility is better. Thread and needles are stored in small containers or wrapped in cloth for protection. Mending is done by women and older girls who have learned the skill through practice. Stitches are functional rather than decorative and prioritize durability over appearance in all cases. Garments are patched repeatedly over their lifespan until the fabric becomes too worn to hold. Wool and linen are the primary materials and both require different techniques for effective repair. Children are prepared for sleep by washing hands and faces in basins of warm water. Dirt is scrubbed away with cloths dampened and wrung out before use on skin. Hair is checked for tangles and smoothed with fingers or wooden combs when available. Younger children are undressed and helped into sleeping garments or wrapped in additional blankets. Older children manage their own preparations with minimal supervision or assistance from adults. Teeth are occasionally cleaned by rubbing with cloths or chewing on fibrous plant material. The practice is not universal and depends on individual habits rather than established routine. Bedding is adjusted and smoothed to remove lumps or uneven areas in the straw. Blankets are layered according to the temperature expected during the night hours ahead. Additional coverings are placed nearby for use if the air grows colder than anticipated. Pillows are sacks filled with straw, feathers, or cloth scraps and flattened from use. They provide minimal elevation but serve their purpose adequately for sleep and rest. Beds creak when weight is applied, but the sounds are familiar and go unnoticed. Positions are found through small adjustments of limbs and body until comfort is achieved. Prayers are spoken quietly by some families before sleep but are not universal practice. Words are simple and repetitive, asking for protection and provision in familiar phrases. Children repeat words taught to them without full understanding of their meaning or significance. The practice provides structure to the end of the day and marks transition to rest. Silence follows and the household settles into stillness as breathing slows and deepens. Fires are banked with ash to preserve embers for rekindling in the morning hours. Light fades to a dim glow that barely illuminates the shapes of furniture and walls. Sounds from outside become more noticeable as interior activity ceases and voices stop. Wind moves through trees and around buildings in patterns that vary with the season. Animals make occasional noises, but these are expected and do not cause alarm or investigation. Distant sounds from neighboring homes fade as others also settle into rest for the night. The village becomes quiet except for natural sounds that continue regardless of human activity. Sleep comes gradually without resistance or prolonged wakefulness, in most cases observed over time. Days follow the same pattern with only minor variations caused by weather or season. The sequence of tasks remains consistent and predictable across weeks and months and years. Waking happens at the same time relative to the position of the sun. Fires are started in the same manner using the same materials kept in the same locations. Water is fetched from the same wells along the same paths worn into the ground. Meals are prepared with the same ingredients combined in the same ways repeatedly. The routine provides structure without requiring decisions or planning beyond what has always been done. Fields require attention throughout the growing season in cycles that repeat each year without change. Soil is prepared, seeds are planted, crops are tended, and harvests are gathered when ready. Weeds grow between rows and are pulled by hand or cut with hoes. The work is constant and must be repeated as new weeds appear in previously cleared areas. Bending and straightening happen thousands of times during a single day in the fields. Backs ache from the repeated motion, but the discomfort is expected and tolerated without complaint. Hands develop calluses that protect the skin from blisters and raw spots over time. Rain is watched for and welcomed when it comes at appropriate times during growth cycles. Too much rain causes problems with flooding or rot in plants and stored grain. Too little rain results in poor growth and reduced yields at harvest time later. Observations are made daily regarding the condition of sky and clouds and wind direction. Predictions are based on experience and patterns noticed over many seasons of similar work. Accuracy is imperfect but provides some guidance for deciding when to delay or proceed. The weather dictates much of the work schedule but cannot be controlled or influenced. Crops are inspected for signs of disease or damage from insects and small animals. Leaves are examined for discoloration or holes that indicate problems requiring attention or action. Plants showing severe damage are sometimes removed to prevent spread to healthy neighbors nearby. Protective measures are limited and rely on physical barriers or removal rather than treatments. Fences are built from wood or woven branches to keep larger animals away. Birds are discouraged by children assigned to watch fields and make noise when flocks appear. The methods are simple and partially effective, but losses are expected and accepted. Harvesting begins when crops reach maturity as indicated by color and texture and firmness. Timing is important but determined by observation rather than calendars or written records of dates. Grain is cut with sickles in sweeping motions that sever stalks near ground level. Bundles are tied with strips of the same plant material and stacked in fields. Drying occurs in open air under sun and wind for periods lasting days or weeks. Dried bundles are collected and transported to storage areas or threshing floors for processing. The work involves entire families and sometimes cooperation between multiple households when fields are large. Threshing separates grain from stalks through beating with wooden flails or trampling by animals. The process is repetitive and produces dust that fills the air and coats skin. Cloths are tied over faces to reduce breathing the dust during long hours of work. Grain falls free and is collected while stalks and chaff are set aside. Winnowing uses wind to blow away lighter chaff while heavier grain falls into baskets. The technique requires practice to position baskets and pour grain at correct angles. Wind conditions must be suitable or the process does not work effectively and must wait. Storage of grain is done in wooden bins, ceramic vessels, or dedicated rooms within structures. Containers are checked for holes or gaps that might allow entry by rodents or insects. Grain is poured carefully to avoid spilling and is leveled to maximize the amount stored. Lids or covers are placed on top to provide protection from moisture and pests. Some loss to spoilage or theft by animals is expected despite precautions taken consistently. Checks are performed periodically to assess condition and remove any portions showing signs of rot. The stored grain provides food until the next harvest comes many months in the future. Root vegetables are dug from the ground when leaves begin to die back naturally. Digging is done with wooden spades or pointed sticks thrust into soil around plants. Roots are pulled free and soil is shaken off before placing them in baskets. Vegetables are sorted by size and condition with damaged ones set aside for immediate use. Storage happens in cool, dark places like cellars or pits dug into the ground. Layers of straw or sand are used to separate vegetables and prevent contact between them. The cool temperature slows decay and extends the usable period for food supply significantly. Preservation techniques are applied to foods that would otherwise spoil quickly in warm conditions. Salting is used for meat and fish to draw out moisture and prevent rot. Salt is rubbed into surfaces and the items are hung in dry areas. Smoking uses wood fires to expose food to smoke over extended periods of time. The smoke adds flavor and creates an environment hostile to spoilage and insect infestation. Drying is used for fruits, herbs, and some vegetables by exposure to sun and air. The methods require time and attention but allow food to be kept for months. Dairy products are consumed fresh or processed into forms that last longer without refrigeration. Milk sours quickly and is often made into cheese to extend its useful life. Cheese making involves heating milk and adding substances that cause it to curdle and separate. Curds are pressed to remove liquid and shaped into rounds or blocks for aging. Aging happens in cool areas and continues for weeks or months depending on the type. The process is familiar and follows steps learned from previous generations without written guidance. Results vary slightly but remain edible and nutritious for extended periods when stored properly. Butter is made by agitating cream in wooden churns until fat separates from liquid. The process is tiring and requires sustained effort over a long period of time. Children sometimes help by taking turns when arms grow tired from the repetitive motion. Butter is collected and washed with cold water to remove remaining liquid portions. Salt is added to improve flavor and help preserve it for future use. The butter is packed into containers and kept cool until needed for cooking or spreading. Leftover liquid is consumed as a drink or used in cooking other dishes immediately. Textile work occupies time during periods when outdoor work is limited by weather or darkness. Spinning transforms raw wool or flax into thread using wooden spindles weighted with stones. Fibers are drawn out and twisted to create continuous lengths of usable thread. The motion is rhythmic and becomes automatic with practice over months and years of repetition. Thread is wound onto spindles or into balls for storage until needed for weaving. Quality varies depending on the skill of the spinner and the condition of materials. Weaving is done on looms constructed from wood and set up in homes or dedicated spaces. Threads are arranged in patterns that determine the final appearance and structure of cloth. The loom is operated by passing shuttles back and forth between vertical threads repeatedly. Each pass is followed by beating the new thread into place with a wooden tool. The work proceeds slowly and produces cloth in lengths suitable for cutting into garments. Patterns are simple and colors are natural or created from plant-based dyes available locally. The cloth is sturdy and functional rather than decorative or ornamental in most cases. Sewing converts cloth into garments shaped to fit bodies with minimal waste of material. Pieces are cut using existing garments as patterns or by measuring with hands and string. Edges are joined with stitches made by hand using needles made from bone or metal. Seams are reinforced in areas subject to stress like shoulders and underarms during movement. Hems are folded and stitched to prevent fraying and to adjust length as needed. The work is done during daylight when visibility is sufficient for the detailed task. Garments are made to last and are repaired multiple times before being discarded entirely. Shoes are constructed from leather treated to resist water and shaped to protect feet. Soles are thick and stitched or nailed to uppers that wrap around the foot. Fit is approximate and comfort develops over time as leather molds to individual foot shapes. Repairs are common and involve replacing worn sections or adding patches over holes that develop. Some people go barefoot during warm months to preserve shoes for harsher weather conditions. Feet become toughened from contact with ground and develop calluses that provide natural protection from injury. Water sources are maintained through regular cleaning and repair of wells and collection areas. Stones lining well walls are checked for looseness or displacement that might cause collapse. Ropes are inspected for fraying and replaced when weakness is noticed during daily use. Buckets are examined for cracks or separations in the wood that might allow leakage. The work is done by those who use the wells most frequently in rotation. Debris that falls into wells is removed using long poles or by lowering someone down. The water is tested by observation and smell before being declared safe for continued use. Paths between homes and fields are kept clear by walking them repeatedly each day. Vegetation that encroaches is trampled or cut back to maintain passage for people and animals. Stones are moved aside when they shift into the path and create obstacles to walking. Ruts form during wet periods and harden when dry, creating uneven surfaces for feet. Repairs are minimal and consist mainly of filling low spots with dirt or gravel. The paths remain functional without formal maintenance or organized efforts to improve their condition significantly. Walking the same routes creates knowledge of every rise and depression without conscious attention. Fences require ongoing repair as weather and animals cause damage to posts and rails. Posts are set into the ground and rot over time where wood contacts moist soil. Replacement involves digging out old posts and setting new ones in the same locations. Rails are fitted between posts and secured with wooden pegs or leather straps and rope. Animals push against fences and loosen connections that must be tightened or rebuilt periodically. The work is done when noticed rather than on a schedule determined in advance. Materials are gathered from nearby wooded areas and shaped with axes and knives. Roofs are inspected after storms or high winds that might dislodge thatch or tiles. Ladders are leaned against walls and climbed carefully to reach the roof surface. Damaged areas are identified by gaps or thin spots where underlying structure shows through. New thatch is bundled and carried up to replace sections that have blown away. The bundles are tucked and layered to shed water effectively away from the interior below. Securing is done with wooden pegs or by weaving new thatch into existing layers. The work requires balance and care to avoid falling or causing additional damage during repairs. Walls are patched when cracks appear in the daub or when wattle becomes exposed. New daub is mixed from clay, straw, and water in wooden troughs or on the ground. The mixture is applied by hand and pressed into gaps to fill them completely. Smoothing is done with wet hands or flat pieces of wood until surfaces are even. Drying takes several days depending on weather and thickness of the application made initially. The patches are rarely invisible but serve their purpose of sealing gaps against wind. Reapplication is needed periodically as the material shrinks or falls away with age and weather. Chimneys and smoke holes are cleared of built-up soot that restricts airflow and creates risk. Long poles with bundles of branches tied to the ends are pushed up from below. The motion dislodges accumulations which fall down into the hearth area and are swept out. Breathing becomes easier during the process as air movement improves through the cleared opening. The task is done when smoke begins backing up into living spaces during fires. Frequency depends on how much wood is burned and the type of wood used. Gardens near homes are tended throughout the growing season with regular weeding and watering. Soil is loosened around plants to allow roots to spread and water to penetrate deeply. Stones are removed when they work their way to the surface through freezing and thawing. Compost from kitchen scraps and animal waste is spread to enrich the soil before planting. Seeds are saved from previous years and planted in rows marked with sticks or string. Growth is monitored and plants are thinned when they become too crowded for proper development. Harvesting happens continuously as vegetables reach appropriate sizes for use in daily meals. Herbs are picked in the morning after dew has dried but before heat becomes intense. Leaves and stems are bundled and hung upside down in dry areas with good air circulation. Drying takes days or weeks depending on the plant and the humidity in the air. Dried herbs are stored in cloth bags or pottery containers away from light and moisture. They are used throughout the year for flavoring food and for remedies when illness occurs. Knowledge of which plants to use for which purposes is passed verbally from those experienced. Mistakes are possible but consequences are usually minor and temporary in their effects observed. Firewood collection is a continuous task performed whenever time and weather allow throughout the year. Fallen branches are gathered from the ground in wooded areas near the settlement. Larger pieces are cut from dead trees using axes and saws worked by 2 people. Wood is stacked in piles to dry for months before being brought inside for burning. Green wood produces more smoke and less heat, so drying is important for efficiency. Splitting is done with wedges and mallets to create pieces sized for hearths and ovens. The work is physically demanding and continues until sufficient supply is accumulated for the cold months. Tool handles break or come loose from heads and require replacement or tightening before use. Wooden handles are shaped from straight-grained wood using knives and scrapers to achieve proper fit. The wood is fitted into the metal head and secured with wedges driven in tightly. Where causes loosening over time and wedges must be replaced or additional ones added. Some tools are set aside when repair is not possible or practical given available materials. Broken metal parts are kept for reuse or trade but cannot be repaired without specialized skills. Pottery is made from clay dug from riverbanks or specific locations known for good material. The clay is cleaned of stones and debris by hand and mixed with water. Shaping is done by hand or on simple wheels turned manually during the forming process. Vessels are dried slowly to prevent cracking before being fired in kilns or open fires. Firing hardens the clay and makes it suitable for holding liquids and storing food. Breakage is common and pieces are discarded or reused as drainage in garden beds. New pottery is made to replace losses when clay and time are both available together. Baskets are woven from willow shoots or other flexible plant materials gathered when green and pliable. Strips are soaked in water to maintain flexibility during the weaving process that takes hours. Patterns are simple and functional rather than decorative in most examples produced for daily use. Handles are incorporated during construction and reinforced to withstand weight of contents when filled. Finished baskets are used for carrying, storing, and processing food and other materials around homes. They wear out and are discarded when holes develop or the structure weakens beyond repair. New baskets are made as needed to replace those no longer functional for their intended purposes. Candles are made by dipping wicks repeatedly into melted tallow or beeswax when it is available. Each layer adds thickness until the candle reaches a usable diameter for burning slowly. The process is repeated many times and requires patience as each layer must cool before adding. Finished candles are stored in cool places to prevent softening or bending out of shape. Burning provides light for tasks performed after dark when firelight alone is insufficient for detail. Candles are expensive in terms of materials and labor, so use is limited to necessity. Soap is made from animal fat and lye created from wood ash soaked in water repeatedly. The mixture is heated and stirred until it thickens into a usable consistency for cleaning. Cooling and hardening take time before the soap can be cut into pieces for use. The process is done infrequently and produces enough soap for many weeks or months ahead. Cleaning with soap is reserved for particularly dirty items or for special occasions rather than routine. Most washing is done with water alone or with sand for scrubbing surfaces and items. Seasonal changes bring different tasks to the foreground while others recede in importance temporarily. Spring requires planting and preparation of fields after winter dormancy ends and ground thaws. Summer involves tending growing crops and making repairs to structures in dry weather conditions. Autumn is dominated by harvest work and preservation of food for the months ahead. Winter focuses on indoor work and maintenance of tools and equipment when outdoor work is limited. The cycle repeats without variation and provides rhythm to the passing of time throughout years. Community work brings multiple households together for tasks too large for individuals or single families. Barn raising requires many hands to lift timbers and secure them in position safely. Harvest of large fields proceeds faster when neighbors work together and share the labor. Road repair involves moving stones and filling ruts along paths used by everyone in the area. Payment for such help is often in kind with food or reciprocal labor when needed. The obligations are remembered and fulfilled without formal agreements or written contracts between the parties involved. Mornings continue to begin in the same manner regardless of the season or weather conditions. Waking happens with the gradual increase of light entering through gaps in shutters and doorways. Bodies adjust to consciousness slowly through small movements of fingers and toes before larger motions. Blankets are pulled back and the transition from warmth to cooler air is made. Feet find the floor in darkness or dim light without need for vision to guide. Clothing is located by touch and memory of where items were placed the night before. Dressing proceeds in the same order each day with undergarments first, then outer layers. Fires are uncovered by sweeping away ash that was banked over embers the previous evening. Air reaches the coals and they begin to glow brighter with the increased oxygen available. Small pieces of dry kindling are placed directly on the coals and positioned to catch flame. Breath is sometimes blown gently to encourage ignition when the fire is slow to start. Larger pieces are added gradually as flames establish themselves and heat begins to build. The process is familiar and requires minimal attention once the pattern is learned through repetition. Smoke rises up through chimneys or designated openings in roofs above the hearth areas. Morning routines are performed without speaking in many households until tasks are well underway. The silence is comfortable and not interpreted as unfriendliness or tension between people present. Water is poured from storage vessels into smaller containers for washing and for heating over fires. Faces and hands are washed with water that is cool or slightly warm depending on season. Hair is arranged or tied back to keep it away from faces during work ahead. Children are roused from sleep by gentle touches or quiet words spoken near their bedding. They rise and dress themselves or are dressed by adults depending on their age. Breakfast is simple and consists of foods that require minimal preparation time in the morning. Porridge from the previous evening might be reheated if any remains in the pot overnight. Bread is sliced and eaten plain or with small amounts of butter or cheese when available. Milk is poured into cups and consumed while standing near the hearth for warmth. Eating is quick and no one lingers at the table beyond the time needed. Bowls and cups are rinsed and set aside for more thorough washing later in the day. Bodies are prepared for work through the consumption of food that provides energy for labor. Men gather tools and leave homes to begin work in locations determined by the day's needs. Fields require attention during growing seasons, but other work is done during times of rest. Wood cutting happens throughout the year to maintain supplies for burning and for construction projects. Repairs to structures and fences are made when materials and time both allow for completion. The work is decided based on observation of what needs doing rather than written plans. Conversations between men are brief and focused on coordinating efforts when cooperation is required for tasks. Women remain closer to homes and focus on tasks that center around domestic maintenance and food. Fires are maintained at levels appropriate for cooking and heating throughout the entire day. Water is fetched in multiple trips as needs arise for various uses and purposes. Laundry is done when enough dirty items accumulate to justify the effort and water usage. Food preparation begins early for meals that will be eaten later after work is completed. Ingredients are gathered from storage areas and gardens and brought to work surfaces for processing. Children are supervised and given small tasks appropriate to their abilities and strength levels available. Spinning is done during moments between other tasks or when seated near fires for warmth. The motion of drawing out fibers and twisting them becomes automatic with extended practice over time. Thread accumulates slowly on spindles and is transferred to storage when the spindle becomes full. Conversation sometimes accompanies spinning when multiple women work in the same space together during daylight. Topics include observations about weather, children, illnesses, and upcoming tasks requiring attention or cooperation from neighbors. The talk is quiet and does not interfere with the rhythm of hands performing work. Mending is ongoing and items needing repair accumulate until time is available for focused work. Tiers are stitched closed using thread matched as closely as possible to the original fabric. Patches are cut from worn-out garments and sewn over holes that cannot be simply stitched. The work is done by lamplight or firelight when daylight fades, but tasks remain unfinished. I strain to see the fine work, and mistakes are made but corrected when noticed. Finished items are folded and returned to storage or given to the person who will wear them. Cooking occupies significant portions of time as meals require preparation hours before they will be consumed. Vegetables are washed in basins of water and dirt is scrubbed away from roots and leaves. Cutting is done on wooden boards worn concave from years of knife work in the same spots. Pieces are added to pots in layers with the densest items placed at the bottom near heat. Stirring redistributes ingredients and prevents burning on the bottom surface of the pot where contact occurs. Tasting happens periodically to assess the need for additional salt or other simple seasonings available at hand. Bread baking follows a rhythm determined by how quickly the household consumes the loaves previously made. Dough is mixed and kneaded until the texture becomes smooth and elastic under hands pressing. Rising happens near the warmth of the fire and the dough expands visibly over the course of hours. Loaves are shaped and placed in ovens or on hearthstones to bake until crusts form and brown. The smell fills the space and signals the progress of baking even without visual inspection needed. Finished bread is removed and cooled before being stored or consumed immediately while still warm from baking. Midday brings brief pauses in work for eating small amounts of food and resting bodies. Men in fields sit in shade if available or simply stop moving and lower themselves to the ground. Food carried from home is eaten without ceremony or extended break from the ongoing labor. Water is drunk from containers brought along and consumption is moderate to avoid discomfort while working afterward. Conversation is minimal and rest periods are short before work resumes at the same pace. Women eat while continuing to tend fires or watch children who require supervision during all waking hours. Food is consumed standing or while performing tasks that do not require both hands simultaneously for completion. Breaks are not clearly defined and work transitions from one task to another without stopping entirely. Children eat when hungry and food is given to them without formal meal times established. Portions are small and frequent rather than concentrated into specific eating periods during the day observed. Afternoon work continues with the same activity started earlier without significant change in type or pace. Fields are worked until the assigned sections are completed or until light becomes insufficient for safe labor. Tools are cleaned of dirt before being carried back to homes for storage overnight and next day use. Animals in fields are led back to enclosures and given water and feed for the evening ahead. Men return along the same paths walked that morning in the opposite direction toward homes and rest. Women prepare evening meals using methods identical to those used for countless meals before this one. Ingredients are combined and cooked until done as determined by appearance and texture familiar from repetition. Tables are set with the same items in the same arrangements used every day without variation. Family members gather when the meal is ready and seat themselves in their usual positions around tables. Eating proceeds in the same manner as always with quiet attention to the food provided and consumed. Cleaning follows eating and consists of the same steps performed in the same order each evening. Water is heated, items are washed, and everything is returned to storage locations until needed again. Floors are swept and debris is removed from living areas to maintain basic cleanliness standards accepted. Fires are adjusted to levels appropriate for the cooler evening temperatures that arrive after the sun sets. Preparations for sleep begin as darkness makes other work difficult or impossible to perform with accuracy. Children are prepared for bed through washing and changing into sleeping garments or simply removing outer layers. They settle into bedding arranged in the same locations they have slept for extended periods of time. Adults complete final tasks and check that animals are secure and fires are banked properly. Doors are closed and latched with simple mechanisms that provide minimal security but signal the day's end. Darkness is complete except for the faint glow remaining from dampened fires and hearths barely visible. Sleep comes as bodies tire from the day's exertions and the absence of stimulation in dark, quiet spaces. Breathing deepens and movement ceases except for occasional adjustments of position during the night hours. The cycle will repeat when morning light returns and the same sequence of tasks begins again. Seasons change and years pass, but the pattern remains largely unchanged across generations of people living similarly. Time is marked by repetition rather than by unique events that distinguish one day from another clearly. Fields are walked each morning to observe the condition of crops and soil without specific action. Rows are inspected visually for changes that might indicate problems developing over time gradually. Leaves are touched occasionally to feel for wetness or unusual textures that suggest disease presence. The walking follows the same pattern through the field from one end to the other. Observations are mental and rarely discussed unless something requires immediate attention from multiple people working. Most days the inspection reveals nothing requiring action and work proceeds as it did yesterday. Weeds continue to grow despite previous efforts to remove them from areas around planted crops. The same types of weeds appear in the same locations year after year predictably. Pulling them is done by grasping near the base and tugging until roots release. Some weeds break off, leaving roots that will regrow and require pulling again later repeatedly. The work is endless, and acceptance of this fact makes it neither frustrating nor satisfying. Piles of pulled weeds are left to dry in the sun before being gathered for composting. Soil is examined by taking handfuls and feeling the texture between fingers and in the palm. Moisture content is assessed this way and determines whether watering is needed for the crops. Dry soil crumbles and falls through fingers while moist soil holds together when pressed lightly. The assessment is subjective and based on experience gained through many seasons of similar examinations daily. Decisions about watering are made based on this simple test repeated in multiple locations across fields. Watering is done by carrying buckets from wells or streams to areas where crops grow. The water is poured near the base of plants, allowing it to soak into soil. Multiple trips are required to water even small areas adequately for plant needs to be met. The work is tiring and time-consuming but necessary during periods without adequate rainfall from weather. Buckets are heavy when full and lighter when empty, creating a rhythm to the walking. Handles leave marks on hands that redden and sometimes blister despite calluses already present from other work. Animals graze in areas not used for crops and move slowly while eating available grass. They are watched from a distance to ensure they do not wander beyond acceptable boundaries established. Watching consists of sitting or standing in locations with good visibility of the grazing area. Intervention is only needed when animals move toward boundaries or when predators are noticed nearby. Most days nothing happens and the watching is simply a matter of being present for hours. Milk is collected from animals at regular intervals determined by their natural cycles of production. The process involves sitting beside the animal and pulling rhythmically on udders to release milk. Streams of milk hit the bottom of wooden pails, creating sounds that change as liquid accumulates. The work requires grip strength and repetitive motion that tires hands and forearms over time. Animals stand calmly during milking as they are accustomed to the routine from long practice. Finished pails are carried carefully to avoid spilling the contents that will be used immediately. Cheese is made from milk that exceeds immediate consumption needs or is intended for storage purposes. Heating milk in pots over fires begins the process, and temperature is judged by observation and experience. Ingredients are added to cause separation of curds from liquid whey in the heated milk. Stirring continues until the separation is complete and curds form distinct masses in the liquid. Whey is drained off and curds are pressed to remove remaining moisture before shaping and storage. The process takes hours and requires attention at specific intervals but not constant monitoring throughout the duration. Bread dough is prepared in amounts sufficient for several days of consumption by the household members. Flour is measured by volume using containers of standard size kept for this purpose only. Water is added gradually while mixing until the consistency feels correct to experienced hands performing the work. Kneading develops the texture needed for proper rising and baking later in the process, continuing hours. The dough is covered and left in warm locations to rise until doubled in size visibly. Shaping into loaves happens after rising and before the final baking in ovens or on hearthstones. Ovens are heated by building fires inside them and allowing the structure to absorb heat fully. The fire is removed or reduced before bread is placed inside for baking in the retained heat. Temperature cannot be controlled precisely and is judged by how long hands can be held inside. Baking times are estimated based on experience with similar conditions observed in previous baking sessions performed. Bread is removed when the crust is firm and the loaf sounds hollow when tapped lightly. Cooling happens on surfaces away from heat before the bread is cut or stored for later use. Vegetables from gardens are harvested when they reach sizes considered appropriate for eating or storage needs. Judgment is based on visual assessment and occasionally by testing firmness with hands or fingers gently. Harvesting is done by cutting stems or pulling entire plants depending on the type of vegetable. The harvested items are placed in baskets and carried to work areas for cleaning and preparation. Some vegetables are eaten immediately while others are set aside for preservation through drying or storage. The decision depends on current needs and the quantity available from the garden at that time. Preservation work begins soon after harvesting to prevent spoilage of food that will not be consumed. Drying involves slicing vegetables thinly and spreading them on surfaces exposed to sun and air. The slices are turned periodically to ensure even drying on all surfaces and edges completely. Drying times vary with weather conditions and the moisture content of the vegetables being processed. Fully dried items are stored in containers that protect them from moisture and insects until needed. Rehydration before use is done by soaking in water for periods ranging from minutes to hours. Salt preservation involves rubbing salt into surfaces of meat or vegetables to draw out moisture content. The salt is applied generously and the items are left in cool locations while the process works. Excess moisture drips away or evaporates, leaving the food in a state resistant to spoilage mechanisms. Additional salt may be applied after initial moisture is removed to ensure thorough preservation throughout. The preserved items are stored in containers or hung in dry areas until needed for meals. Saltiness is pronounced and rinsing or soaking is sometimes done before cooking to reduce the intensity. Smoking uses fires with woods selected for the flavors they impart to food during the process. Items to be smoked are hung above fires in enclosed spaces that trap and concentrate smoke. The process continues for hours or days depending on the size and type of food being preserved. Smoke penetrates surfaces and interiors, creating conditions unfavorable for bacteria and decay to progress rapidly. The preserved food takes on colors and flavors characteristic of the smoke and wood types used. Storage afterward is in dry, cool places where the smoked items remain edible for extended periods. Firewood is split using axes and wedges driven into logs with mallets or other heavy tools. The wood is positioned on solid surfaces and struck repeatedly until it separates along the grain. Split pieces are stacked to allow air circulation for continued drying before use in fires. Splitting is done throughout the year as time allows and logs become available from cutting. The work requires strength and accuracy to avoid injury from misplaced strikes or flying wood pieces. Muscles tire from the repetitive overhead swinging motion, but the work continues until sufficient wood is prepared. Stacking firewood is done in patterns that maximize stability and airflow through the pile structure created. Pieces are placed in alternating directions layer by layer to prevent shifting or collapse over time. The stacks are built in locations protected from rain but exposed to wind for drying purposes. Height is limited by the ability to safely place pieces on top without climbing or using ladders. Finished stacks represent significant labor and provide visual reassurance of preparation for cold seasons ahead. The wood remains stacked until needed and is taken from the top or sides as required. Water barrels are filled from wells and kept near homes for convenient access during daily tasks. The barrels are wooden and bound with metal bands to prevent the staves from separating outward. Lids are placed on top to prevent debris from falling in and contaminating the stored water. Filling is done using buckets in multiple trips until the barrel reaches capacity and overflows slightly. Water is drawn from barrels using smaller containers dipped in or using spigots near the bottom. Refilling happens when levels drop below halfway to ensure an adequate supply is always maintained and available. Tools are collected each morning from places where they were stored the previous evening after use. Handles are grasped and the weight and balance of each tool is felt through hands. The tools are carried to locations where work will happen during the hours of daylight ahead. Placement of tools near work areas allows for quick access without walking long distances repeatedly. The same tools are used for the same tasks day after day without substitution or variation. Wear on the tools is gradual and becomes noticeable only over extended periods of use. Sharpening is done when tools no longer cut or penetrate materials with the efficiency remembered from earlier. Whetstones are wetted with water or oil depending on the type of stone being used. Blades are held at angles learned through instruction or practice and drawn across the stone repeatedly. The motion is steady and the pressure applied is moderate to avoid damaging the blade edge. Sharpness is tested by feeling the edge carefully or by cutting test materials like wood or rope. The process is repeated until the desired sharpness is achieved and the tool performs as needed. Handles are checked for tightness by grasping and twisting to detect any movement between wood and metal. Loose handles are tightened by driving wedges deeper into the wood or by replacing worn wedges. Splits in handles are wrapped with cord or strips of leather to prevent further spreading. Badly damaged handles are removed and new ones are shaped from available wood using knives and scrapers. Fitting the new handle requires patience and repeated adjustments to achieve a secure connection that will hold. The work is done when time allows rather than immediately when the problem is first noticed. Walking to fields happens along routes that have been used for so long the ground shows wear. The paths are narrow and wind around obstacles like large rocks or wet areas that do not drain. Feet know the placement of each step without conscious thought or attention to the ground surface. Other people are sometimes encountered walking the same paths in opposite directions toward different destinations. Brief greetings are exchanged with nods or single words spoken without stopping the forward motion. The walking is steady and maintains a pace that can be sustained for the distance required. Boundaries between different plots of land are marked by stones or furrows that have been maintained. The markers are respected and crossing them without permission is avoided in normal circumstances always consistently. Disputes over boundaries are rare because the divisions have been established for generations without change. Work is done within assigned areas and attention does not extend beyond what is personally managed. The arrangement allows for independent work without need for constant coordination or communication between neighbors working adjacent areas. Planting follows patterns established through tradition and passed down without written instruction or formal teaching methods. Seeds are spaced by hand measurements or by using sticks to mark intervals along rows. Depth is judged by pushing fingers into soil to create holes of appropriate size for seeds. Seeds are dropped into holes and covered by brushing soil over them with hands or feet. Rows are walked while planting and the motion becomes automatic, allowing thoughts to wander without affecting accuracy. The planted field looks the same as fields planted in previous years by the same methods. Rain is welcomed when it falls during times appropriate for crop growth and development continuing properly. The sound of rain on roofs and leaves is constant and becomes background noise unnoticed after time. Work outdoors stops during heavy rain and resumes when intensity decreases to manageable levels tolerable for continued labor. Clothing becomes wet and stays wet until the rain stops and drying can occur naturally. Discomfort from wetness is expected and does not cause complaint or abandonment of necessary tasks. Mud forms in areas with poor drainage and walking becomes more difficult, requiring additional effort and attention. Animals are moved to sheltered areas when rain persists for extended periods of time repeatedly without breaks. Shelters are simple structures providing protection from direct exposure to falling water from above the animals. Bedding becomes damp despite the shelter and must be changed more frequently than during dry weather. Animals show little reaction to the rain and continue eating and resting in their usual patterns. Milk production and other aspects of animal care continue without significant change during wet periods experienced regularly. Drying happens slowly after rain ends and depends on wind and temperature and humidity in the air. Clothing is hung on lines or draped over fences to allow air to reach all surfaces. Items are left until they feel dry to the touch and no longer smell of dampness or moisture. Indoor drying near fires is used when outdoor drying is not possible due to continued rain. The smell of drying wool fills enclosed spaces and is familiar from frequent occurrence throughout wet seasons. Dryness is achieved eventually and items are folded and stored until needed for wearing again soon. Thatch on roofs absorbs water during rain and releases it gradually through dripping after rain stops. Dripping continues for hours, creating puddles near the edges of structures where water accumulates and pools. The puddles are avoided when walking or are simply stepped through without concern for wet feet. Water eventually soaks into the ground or evaporates, leaving the areas dry until the next rain. Roofs are inspected after heavy rains for leaks that might have developed in weakened sections. Repairs are noted and added to lists of tasks requiring attention when conditions allow for work. Food stores are checked periodically to ensure adequate supplies remain for the time until next harvest arrives. Containers are opened and contents are examined for signs of spoilage or insect damage that might require removal. Affected portions are taken out and discarded or fed to animals depending on the degree of damage. Remaining food is redistributed to fill containers efficiently and make inventory easier to assess visually at a glance. Estimates are made about whether supplies will last and whether rationing might become necessary in coming weeks. The estimates are imprecise but provide some guidance for planning meals and usage of available resources carefully. Bread consumption is adjusted based on availability of flour and the amount remaining in storage containers accessed regularly. Loaves are made smaller or baked less frequently when supplies are lower than desired for the time. Meals include more porridge or other foods that stretch limited grain supplies further than bread alone. The adjustments are made without discussion and family members accept the changes as necessary and appropriate. Hunger is managed through eating slower digesting foods like beans or root vegetables when grain is limited and availability varies. Water usage continues at necessary levels regardless of other shortages because substitution is not possible for most purposes. Wells are monitored for water levels that might drop during dry periods without rain to replenish. Depth to water is measured by lowering weighted ropes and noting where wetness begins on the rope. Deep wells are more reliable but harder to draw water from due to the distance involved. Shallow wells may dry completely during extended drought, requiring use of alternative sources farther away from homes and settlements. Gathering water from streams or springs involves walking longer distances when wells are insufficient or dry completely. The water is carried back in containers that become heavy over the distance walked on uneven ground. Multiple trips are needed daily to meet the requirements of household members and animals being maintained. The work is tiring and time-consuming but cannot be avoided or postponed without serious consequences to health. Children help with water carrying when they are strong enough to manage smaller containers safely without spilling. Cooking adjusts to available water with less washing of ingredients and simpler preparation methods when water is scarce. Pots are wiped rather than washed thoroughly to conserve water for drinking and essential cooking needs only. The adjustments are temporary and normal practices resume when water becomes available again in adequate quantities. Meals remain nutritious though perhaps less varied or carefully prepared than during times of abundance and easy availability. Laundry is postponed during water shortages and clothing is worn longer between washings than would be preferred. Dirt is brushed off garments and they are aired outside to reduce odors from extended wear. The practice is accepted as necessary and no one comments on the reduced cleanliness of clothing during difficult periods. Washing resumes as soon as water allows and the accumulated dirty items are cleaned in the order of priority. The cycle of scarcity and abundance is familiar and does not cause undue concern or anxiety about the future. Seasons bring predictable changes in weather and temperature that affect work and daily routines in expected ways. Cold seasons require more firewood and warmer clothing layered to maintain body heat during work outdoors. Warm seasons allow lighter clothing and longer working hours due to extended daylight available each day. The transitions between seasons are gradual and adjustments are made incrementally as conditions change slowly over weeks. Preparation for coming seasons happens during the current season with gathering and storing of necessary materials. The pattern repeats annually and each year resembles the previous one in most significant respects observed. Maintenance of existing structures occupies time that might otherwise be spent on new construction or expansion. Walls are examined for cracks that have appeared since the last inspection conducted previously some time ago. Small cracks are filled with mud or clay mixed with straw for binding and strength. The mixture is pressed into gaps using fingers and smoothed to match surrounding surfaces as closely as possible. Drying takes days and shrinkage sometimes creates new small gaps requiring additional applications of material over time. The work is repeated as needed without expectation that repairs will be permanent or final in nature. Doors are adjusted when they northwest longer close properly due to settling of frames or swelling of wood. Hinges are tightened or repositioned to allow the door to hang straight within the opening provided. Wood is planed or sanded in areas where rubbing occurs against the frame during opening or closing. The adjustments are small and made with hand tools worked slowly to avoid removing too much material. Testing happens after each adjustment to determine if further work is needed for proper function. Doors are left slightly loose rather than fitted too tightly to allow for seasonal expansion of wood. Floors develop unevenness from wear in areas of frequent foot traffic over many years of use. Depressions are filled with packed earth or sand to restore a more level surface for walking. The fill is tamped down firmly using feet or wooden blocks to compress the material added. New fill settles over time and may require additional applications to maintain the desired level achieved. The process is ongoing and complete levelness is not expected or achieved in most cases observed. Walking adjusts to the permanent irregularities and they are no longer noticed consciously during daily movement. Windows are fitted with shutters that are open during the day and closed at night for warmth. Hinges and latches are maintained to ensure the shutters can be secured against wind and weather. Wood swells in damp conditions and shrinks when dry, creating variations in how shutters fit the openings. Adjustments are made seasonally to account for these changes in the wood dimensions throughout the year. Gaps around shutters allow some air movement but keep out most wind and precipitation adequately enough. Light enters through gaps and cracks even when shutters are closed, providing dim illumination during daytime hours. Heating comes primarily from fires maintained in hearths that occupy central positions in living spaces used daily. Fuel is added to fires throughout the day to maintain steady heat levels appropriate for the season. More fuel is used during cold periods and less during moderate weather when heating is less critical. Smoke rises through chimneys or openings in roofs, and most escapes without filling the interior space excessively. Some smoke remains and creates a haze that is visible, and smells of burning wood constantly present. Eyes adjust to the irritation, and breathing continues normally despite the presence of smoke in the air. Ventilation is limited to gaps around doors and windows and any other openings in the structure walls. Fresh air enters slowly and mixes with the interior air warmed by fires and body heat from occupants. The air inside is warmer than outside during cold weather and cooler during hot weather due to shade. Circulation is minimal, and odors from cooking, people, and animals accumulate over time in enclosed spaces. The smells are familiar and not considered unpleasant by those who live with them constantly every day. Awareness of the odors diminishes, and they become part of the background sensory environment unnoticed mostly. Bedding is aired by taking it outside and draping it over fences or bushes when weather permits. Sunlight and fresh air help reduce mustiness and dampness that accumulate from nightly use over time. The practice is not done daily but occurs when someone thinks of it or when weather is particularly good. Bedding is brought back inside before evening when it will be used again for sleeping through the night. Fleas and other insects are present in bedding and are accepted as unavoidable despite being unpleasant and bothersome. Occasional shaking of blankets and straw helps reduce but does not eliminate the insect populations living there. Insects are present in all seasons, though numbers vary with temperature and availability of breeding sites nearby. Flies are common during warm months and move around homes seeking food and moisture to sustain themselves. Swatting at flies is done occasionally but is not pursued with any consistent effort or success rate. Mosquitoes appear near water sources and during damp evenings when they feed on people and animals. Smoke from fires provides some deterrent to mosquitoes but does not eliminate them from indoor spaces entirely. Bites are scratched and ignored as a normal part of living in the environment provided by nature. Rodents enter structures seeking food and shelter and are controlled through traps and by keeping food stored. Grain is kept in sealed containers or elevated storage areas that are harder for rodents to access. Traps are set near areas where droppings or damage indicate active rodent presence in the structure. Checking traps is done daily, and caught rodents are removed and the traps are reset immediately. Cats are kept by some households to help control rodent populations through hunting and killing them. The cats are not pets but working animals that earn their keep through their natural predatory behaviors. Storage areas are organized to maximize the use of available space in structures with limited room overall. Items are stacked or hung from walls and ceiling beams to keep floor areas clear for movement. Baskets and containers hold smaller items and are placed on shelves or in corners out of the way. Labels are not used, and location memory determines where specific items can be found when needed for use. Organization systems develop over time and remain consistent, making retrieval efficient for those familiar with the arrangement. New items are added to existing systems rather than creating new organizational methods or changing established patterns. Containers are repaired when damage occurs rather than being discarded and replaced with new ones immediately when broken. Cracks in pottery are sometimes bound with cord or wire to hold pieces together temporarily. Baskets with holes are patched using additional weaving material worked into the damaged area carefully with fingers. Wooden boxes are reinforced with additional nails or metal straps when joints loosen from use over many years. The repairs extend the useful life of containers but do not restore them to original condition or strength. Eventually, items become too damaged to repair effectively and are discarded and replaced with new ones made or obtained. Clothing is inspected regularly for wear and damage that requires mending before the garment becomes unwearable completely. Seams are checked for separation and are restitched when weakness is detected before failure occurs widely. Fabric is examined for thin spots that might soon develop into holes requiring patches to cover them. Mending is done promptly when damage is minor rather than waiting until extensive repair is needed. The practice extends the life of garments, which represent significant investment of time and materials to produce. Worn-out clothing is sometimes cut up and the better portions are used as patches for other garments. Shoes receive regular attention because they wear quickly from contact with rough ground and moisture exposure daily. Soles are inspected for holes or thin spots that might soon allow water or stones to enter. Repairs are made by adding layers of leather or by stitching patches over damaged areas on the bottom. Uppers are treated with fat or oil to maintain flexibility and water resistance of the leather material. Stitching is checked and redone when threads break or loosen from the stress of walking and movement. Shoes are dried near fires after becoming wet but not too close to avoid damage from excessive heat. Leather items are maintained with regular applications of oils or fats rubbed into the surface by hand. The treatment keeps leather supple and prevents cracking that occurs when the material dries out completely. Belts, straps, and bags are treated along with shoes and other items made from leather materials. The oil is worked in thoroughly and excess is wiped away to avoid staining clothing or other items. Frequency of treatment depends on how often items are exposed to water and dry conditions that remove oils. The practice is routine and done without measuring or following specific schedules for application timing established. Metal items are kept dry when possible to prevent rust from forming on surfaces exposed to air. Tools are wiped clean after use and stored in dry locations away from direct moisture or rain. Rust that does form is removed by scraping or sanding before it spreads and weakens the metal significantly. Oil is sometimes applied to metal surfaces to create a barrier against moisture and oxidation processes continuing. The maintenance is ongoing and must be repeated regularly to preserve tools and other metal items effectively. Neglected items deteriorate and eventually become unusable, requiring replacement when available or when necessary for work continuation. Routines are maintained through repetition that requires no planning or consideration of alternatives to current methods. Each task is performed the same way it was performed the previous day and the day before. The sequence of activities follows patterns established over long periods of time without recorded beginning or origin. People learn by watching others and by doing the tasks themselves under observation and gentle correction. Instructions are minimal and consist mainly of demonstrations followed by practice until proficiency is achieved adequately. Mastery is not sought, but basic competence is expected and eventually attained through continued repetition over time. Morning tasks begin at the same relative time each day, determined by light rather than by clocks. Waking happens naturally as the body adjusts to the pattern of sleep and wakefulness repeated nightly. Movement begins slowly with stretching and shifting position before rising from bedding to standing position. The transition from sleep to full wakefulness takes time and is not rushed by external demands. Cold air contacts skin as blankets are removed and the body adjusts to the temperature change gradually. Clothing is pulled on in layers, starting with items closest to skin and working outward to outer garments. Fires are tended first before other tasks because warmth and light are needed for activities that follow. Coals are uncovered and kindling is added to restart flames that provide heat for the space. The fire grows as larger pieces of wood are added in sequence from smallest to largest. Heat spreads outward from the hearth and begins to warm the air in the immediate area nearby. Water is set to heat in pots for washing and for preparing food that will be eaten soon. The process is automatic and requires little conscious thought or attention from those performing it repeatedly each morning. Washing is done using water that has been warmed but is not hot enough to cause discomfort. Faces and hands are cleaned first, followed by other areas as time and privacy allow for it. Cloths are dampened and used to wipe skin, removing dirt accumulated during sleep or from previous day's work. Hair is smoothed with wet hands or combed with wooden combs if tangles are present and noticeable. The washing is functional rather than thorough and is completed quickly to allow time for other tasks. Cleanliness is adequate for daily purposes, and more extensive washing happens less frequently when time permits it. Food is prepared using ingredients that are available and familiar from regular use in previous meals made. Grains are measured and added to boiling water to create porridge that cooks while other preparations continue. Bread from previous baking is sliced and placed on surfaces where it will be eaten soon afterward. Cheese or other preserved foods are cut into portions appropriate for the number of people eating together. The meal is simple and provides energy needed for the work that will occupy the day ahead. Eating happens without extended conversation and finishes when bowls and plates are emptied of their contents. Children are prepared for the day by adults who dress them and provide them with food to eat. Younger children require more assistance, while older ones manage most tasks themselves with minimal supervision needed. Instructions are given about tasks expected during the day, and children respond with acknowledgement or nods. Resistance is rare, and children accept their roles in the household functioning without complaint or negotiation. Play happens between assigned tasks and is not scheduled or structured by adults watching over them occasionally. The children know the boundaries of acceptable behavior and stay within them most of the time reliably. Men leave for fields or workshops carrying tools needed for the work planned for that particular day. The walk is familiar and follows paths that have been used for years by the same people. Weather is noted but does not usually change plans unless conditions are severe enough to prevent work. Light rain is common and expected during certain seasons, and work continues despite the wetness and discomfort. Clothing provides some protection but becomes soaked, eventually requiring drying later near fires at day's end. The discomfort is tolerated without complaint as a normal part of working outdoors in variable weather conditions. Fields are worked in sections that are assigned and understood without need for markers or formal boundaries. Plowing, planting, weeding, or harvesting happens depending on the season and the stage of crop growth. The work is physical and repetitive, requiring strength and endurance rather than skill or creativity from workers. Breaks are taken when the body requires rest or when thirst needs to be addressed with water. Food is eaten while standing or sitting briefly at field edges before resuming the work again. Progress is measured by area covered rather than by time spent working on the task at hand. Soil is turned or disturbed to prepare it for planting or to remove competing vegetation from crops. Tools cut into the ground and the earth is moved aside or turned over in repeated motions. The rhythm of the work becomes steady and the mind can wander while the body continues moving. Thoughts are not directed toward anything specific but drift without focus or intention during the labor. Time passes without awareness of its passage until physical tiredness or changing light indicates the day is advancing. The work continues until the assigned area is completed or until conditions require stopping for the day. Animals in fields require minimal supervision as they graze on available vegetation in designated areas nearby. Watching involves remaining within sight of the animals and intervening if they move toward boundaries or hazards. Most days the animals graze peacefully and require no intervention from the person assigned to watch them. Sitting or standing in one location for extended periods allows time for other small tasks to be done. Spinning, mending, or carving might occupy hands while eyes monitor the animals periodically throughout the time spent watching. The work is not demanding but requires presence and attention at intervals to ensure nothing goes wrong. Women work near homes managing tasks that center around food preparation and household maintenance throughout the day. Water is carried from wells in multiple trips as needed for cooking, washing, and other uses requiring it. Laundry is done when enough items have accumulated to justify the effort and water usage required for cleaning. Clothing is scrubbed against stones or rubbed vigorously to remove dirt and stains embedded in the fabric. Rinsing is done in clean water and wringing removes excess moisture before items are hung to dry. The process is tiring and time-consuming but necessary to maintain adequate supplies of clean clothing for household members. Food preparation begins early for meals that will be consumed later after work is completed by those in fields. Vegetables are washed and cut on wooden boards using knives sharpened regularly for this purpose primarily. Grains are ground or prepared in other ways to make them suitable for cooking into edible forms. Pots are filled with ingredients and set over fires to cook slowly throughout the morning and afternoon hours. Stirring happens periodically to prevent sticking or burning on the bottom surfaces of the pots used. The cooking proceeds without constant attention, allowing time for other tasks to be completed simultaneously during preparation. Bread baking follows a schedule determined by how quickly the household consumes the loaves previously made and stored. Dough is mixed and kneaded until the proper consistency is achieved through feel and appearance familiar from experience. Rising happens in warm locations near fires and the dough expands visibly over the course of several hours. Shaping into loaves is done after rising and the loaves are placed in ovens or on hearthstones. Baking transforms the dough into finished bread with crusts that brown and harden during the process of cooking. The bread is removed when done and cooled before being stored or eaten immediately while still warm. Children play near homes in areas visible from doorways or windows where adults can see them occasionally. Games are simple and involve running, chasing, or manipulating objects found in the environment around them casually. Older children supervise younger ones and intervene when conflicts arise or when safety is at risk. Play is interrupted when children are called for tasks or meals and resumes afterward without complaint or resistance. The games are traditional and passed down through observation of older children playing them in previous years. Rules are learned through participation and are enforced by the children themselves without adult intervention in most cases. Afternoon work continues in the same manner as morning work, with the same tasks being performed repetitively. Tiredness increases as the day progresses, but work continues until completion or until light becomes insufficient for safe labor. Tools are cleaned and stored at the end of work periods to prevent damage from exposure to weather. Animals are returned to enclosures and secured for the night with gates latched or tied shut using rope. Walking back to homes follows the same paths used in the morning in the reverse direction toward rest. Conversation is minimal and focus is on completing the journey and beginning evening routines that follow work. Evening routines begin when daylight fades and work in fields or other outdoor locations becomes difficult. Return to homes happens gradually as people finish their tasks and begin walking back along familiar paths. Tools are carried or left in storage locations near work areas depending on whether they will be needed. The walk is quiet and bodies move with the tiredness that comes from sustained physical labor throughout the day. Arrival at homes brings no particular sense of relief or satisfaction but simply marks a transition. The evening tasks are as routine as those performed earlier and follow the same patterns established. Fires are adjusted to provide warmth and light as the temperature drops with the approaching darkness outside. Wood is added in amounts calculated to maintain the fire through evening activities without excessive heat or waste. The fire provides a focal point for activity and people position themselves near it for warmth. Light from flames illuminates the space sufficiently for most tasks but leaves corners and edges in shadow. The flickering creates movement that becomes background and is no longer actively noticed after extended exposure. Sounds of burning wood and occasional popping are constant and blend into the ambient environment unnoticed. Meal preparation for evening follows the same methods used for previous meals earlier in the day. Pots that have been cooking throughout the day are checked for readiness and seasoning is adjusted. Bread is sliced and placed on the table along with any other foods available for consumption. Bowls and spoons are set out in the same positions they occupy every evening without variation. Family members gather when food is ready and seat themselves in their customary places around the table. Serving happens in order, with adults receiving food first, followed by children in descending age order. Eating proceeds quietly, with attention focused on consuming the food provided rather than on conversation or interaction. Portions are adequate but not excessive and are consumed completely without waste or leaving food uneaten. Bread is used to absorb liquid from bowls and is eaten along with the other components. Chewing is thorough and swallowing happens when food is properly broken down and ready for digestion. Children finish quickly and wait silently for adults to complete their eating before anyone leaves the table. The meal ends when all bowls are empty and set aside for washing that will follow. Washing of dishes and utensils is done using water heated during meal preparation for this purpose specifically. Items are scrubbed with cloths or handfuls of straw to remove food residue clinging to surfaces. The water becomes cloudy from the food particles and is changed when it no longer cleans effectively. Clean items are placed on cloths to dry near the fire where warmth aids the evaporation process. Pots used for cooking are scraped clean and wiped rather than fully washed to conserve water and effort. The cleaning process takes the same amount of time each evening and is completed without rushing. Floors are swept using brooms that gather crumbs and dirt into piles near the doorway opening. The accumulated debris is swept outside into the darkness where it will not be tracked back inside. Sweeping follows the same path across the floor each time and covers all areas where people walk. The motion is rhythmic and requires no thought beyond the repetition of familiar strokes and movements. Brooms are returned to their storage locations when finished and lean against walls until needed again. The floor remains clean enough for daily purposes, and more thorough cleaning happens infrequently when time allows. Children are prepared for sleep through washing faces and hands in basins of warm water set aside. Dirt is removed from skin using damp cloths wrung out to avoid excessive dripping or waste. Clothing is removed or loosened depending on the season and the temperature expected during the night hours. Younger children are helped into sleeping areas and covered with blankets appropriate for the conditions anticipated. Older children manage their own preparations and settle into their bedding without assistance or supervision from adults. The process is quiet and efficient, taking only minutes before children are ready for sleep. Adults complete remaining tasks while children settle and become quiet in their sleeping areas nearby. Fires are banked by covering coals with ash to preserve them for rekindling in the morning. Wood for morning use is placed near the hearth within easy reach for the next day's fire starting. Water containers are checked and refilled if levels are low to ensure availability for morning needs. Doors are closed and secured with simple latches that provide minimal security against intrusion from outside. The closing of doors signals the end of active work and the beginning of rest period. Preparation for sleep involves arranging bedding and removing outer layers of clothing that are not needed. Bodies settle into familiar positions developed through habit and repeated night after night for extended periods. Blankets are pulled up to provide warmth as the fire dies down and heat dissipates from the space. Adjustment of position happens several times as comfort is sought and achieved through minor movements and shifts. Breathing slows naturally as the body transitions from wakefulness to sleep without conscious effort or intention. The room becomes quiet except for the sounds of breathing and occasional movements during the night. Darkness is complete except for the faint glow from the banked fire visible in the hearth area. Eyes adjust but visibility remains very limited and movement is avoided once settled for sleep. Sounds from outside are minimal during night hours and consist mainly of wind and occasional animal noises. The sounds are familiar and do not cause alarm or interruption of sleep in most instances observed. Temperature drops during the night and bodies adjust by drawing closer together or adding blankets as needed. Sleep continues with brief interruptions for adjusting position or checking on children who make sounds or move. Morning arrives with the gradual increase of light that penetrates through gaps in shutters and doors. Waking happens slowly as awareness returns and bodies begin to move slightly in response to increasing light. The pattern repeats and the day begins again with the same sequence of tasks performed yesterday. There is no sense of anticipation or dread but simply acceptance of the continuation of established routines. Blankets are pushed aside and feet touch the floor in the same motion used every morning previously. Clothing is pulled on and the process of preparing for the day moves forward without hesitation. The cycle continues without significant variation across days and weeks and months that pass unmarked by special events. Seasons change and bring different weather and different crops, but the basic pattern remains consistent and predictable. Children grow and take on more responsibilities, but the work itself does not change in its essential nature. Older people slow down and younger ones take over tasks in gradual transitions that happen without formal planning. The community continues functioning through the repetition of familiar activities performed by those capable of doing them. Knowledge passes from one generation to the next through observation and participation rather than through formal instruction or documentation. Children watch adults and imitate their actions until the movements become natural and automatic through practice. Correction happens when errors are made, but praise is rare and accomplishment is expected rather than celebrated. The learning process is gradual and continues over years until full competence is achieved in all necessary tasks. Some people develop greater skill than others, but basic proficiency is universal among those who participate regularly. Changes occur slowly and are often implemented only when necessary due to failure of existing methods or tools. Innovation is rare and new techniques are viewed with suspicion until they prove themselves over extended periods. The familiar is preferred over the novel and comfort is found in repetition rather than in variety. Risk is avoided when possible and decisions favor maintaining current conditions over pursuing potential improvements that might fail. The approach ensures stability but limits progress and keeps life consistent across many generations living similarly. Weather variations bring temporary adjustments to routines but do not fundamentally alter the pattern of daily life. Heavy rain delays outdoor work, but indoor tasks continue and absorb the time that would otherwise be spent. Extreme cold requires more fuel for fires and warmer clothing, but the basic activities remain the same. Drought affects water availability and crop growth, but people adapt through rationing and adjusting expectations for yields. The adjustments are temporary and normal patterns resume when conditions return to typical ranges experienced regularly. Health issues arise and are managed through rest and simple remedies passed down through traditional knowledge systems. Serious illness sometimes results in death, but more often resolves on its own with time and rest. Treatments are limited to herbs, teas, and poultices applied externally or consumed to address symptoms observed. Effectiveness is variable and improvement may result from treatment or simply from natural recovery processes occurring. Medical knowledge is practical and based on experience rather than on understanding of underlying mechanisms or causes. The approach is adequate for most common ailments encountered in daily life within the community setting. Days continue in succession without markers distinguishing one from another in memory or record keeping. The passage of time is noted through seasonal changes rather than through counting individual days or weeks. Routines remain constant and provide structure that does not require conscious planning or decision-making daily. Tasks are performed because they have always been performed in that manner by those who came before. The reasons for particular methods are often unknown or forgotten, but the practices continue unchanged regardless. Questioning of established ways is uncommon and adherence to tradition is automatic and unreflective in nature. Fields are visited daily during growing seasons to observe conditions and perform necessary maintenance work repeatedly. The observations are the same each day with only minor variations in plant growth or weather. Weeds are pulled continuously as new ones appear in areas that were cleared days or weeks earlier. The work never reaches completion but continues as an ongoing process without defined endpoint or goal. Acceptance of the endless nature of the task prevents frustration or sense of futility from developing. Hands move through motions that require no thought and minds remain passive during the extended periods spent. Walking between locations follows paths that are known in complete detail from repeated use over years. Each stone and depression is familiar and feet adjust automatically to the terrain without visual attention. The walking allows time for thoughts to drift without direction or purpose toward any particular subject. Often no distinct thoughts form and the mind remains quiet while the body moves forward steadily. Arrival at destinations happens without awareness of the journey that preceded it in most instances observed. The automatic nature of movement allows conservation of mental energy for other purposes when needed occasionally. Animals are tended with the same actions repeated daily regardless of any visible need for intervention or care. Feeding happens at regular times determined by habit rather than by observation of hunger in the animals. Water is provided and checked even when containers remain full from previous fillings done earlier that day. The consistency of care ensures needs are met without requiring assessment or judgment from the person providing. The animals respond to the regular schedule and anticipate the timing of feeding and other care activities. Their behavior becomes predictable and variations are rare enough to be noteworthy when they occur unexpectedly. Milk collection follows the same pattern each time with animals positioned and hands moving through familiar motions. The rhythm of pulling creates streams of milk that hit the bucket in regular intervals creating sound. The sound changes as the bucket fills but the motion remains constant throughout the entire process. Muscles perform the work automatically and attention can shift to other thoughts or to nothing at all. The task completes when udders are empty and no more milk can be extracted through continued effort. The bucket is carried carefully to avoid spilling and the milk is processed or stored immediately afterward. Food preparation involves the same ingredients combined in the same proportions to create familiar results expected by those eating. Measurements are done by hand and eye rather than by tools providing precise quantities each time. Variations in amounts are small and do not significantly affect the final product or its acceptability to consumers. Cooking times are estimated based on appearance and experience rather than measured by any external timing device. Testing for doneness happens through observation of color, texture, and smell familiar from countless previous preparations. The food is deemed ready when it matches the expected characteristics retained in memory from past meals. Bread dough is kneaded with the same motions repeated until the texture feels correct under hands pressing. The feeling is learned through practice and becomes a reliable indicator of readiness for rising and baking. Rising time varies with temperature but the doubling of volume provides a visual cue that is consistent. Baking proceeds without measurement of time and readiness is judged by crust color and the hollow sound produced. The finished product is consistent despite the absence of precise controls during any stage of the process. Experience replaces measurement and produces adequate results for the purposes required by daily consumption needs. Mending of clothing and other fabric items is done when tears appear or when wear becomes visible. Thread is matched to fabric color approximately but exact matches are not required or expected by anyone. Stitches are functional and serve to close gaps or attach patches without decorative intent or concern. The repairs are visible but this is accepted as normal and does not diminish the value or usefulness. Patched garments are worn without self-consciousness or concern about appearance to others who view them. Everyone wears similarly repaired items and the practice is universal rather than indicating poverty or neglect specifically. Tools are used until they fail completely rather than being replaced when efficiency begins to decline noticeably. Dull blades are sharpened repeatedly until the metal becomes too thin to hold an edge effectively. Broken handles are repaired with wrappings or replacement pieces shaped from available wood on hand nearby. The repairs extend useful life but do not restore original quality or performance levels initially present. Eventually, replacement becomes necessary and new tools are made or obtained through trade with others who specialize. The cycle continues with new tools eventually requiring the same maintenance and repairs as their predecessors did. Storage areas maintain the same organization over long periods with items returning to the same locations after use. Memory of placement replaces the need for labels or other visual indicators of contents within containers. Finding items is automatic and requires no searching or conscious recall of where things might be located. The system works efficiently for those familiar with it but would be opaque to outsiders unfamiliar with the arrangement. Changes to organization are rare and occur only when space constraints require redistribution of stored materials throughout. Seasonal tasks rotate in predictable cycles that repeat annually without variation in timing or sequence of activities. Planting happens when soil conditions and weather patterns indicate appropriate timing based on accumulated experience over years. Harvesting follows maturation of crops indicated by visual and tactile assessment of readiness for collection and processing. Preservation activities begin immediately after harvest to prevent loss of food to spoilage or animal consumption. The timing is dictated by natural cycles rather than by arbitrary dates recorded on calendars or other instruments. Flexibility exists within general timeframes, but the overall sequence remains fixed and unchanging across generations observed. Weather is observed daily, but predictions are limited to short-term patterns visible in sky conditions and wind. Rain is anticipated when clouds gather and wind shifts to directions associated with precipitation historically noted. Temperature changes are felt rather than measured and preparations adjust accordingly for expected conditions ahead shortly. Accuracy of predictions is moderate and surprises occur regularly when conditions develop differently than expected patterns suggested. The unpredictability is accepted as normal and plans remain flexible enough to accommodate unexpected changes when encountered. Work adapts to actual conditions rather than proceeding based on predictions that prove incorrect upon observation later. Community interactions occur during shared work activities or chance meetings while traveling between locations regularly used. Conversations are brief and focus on practical matters requiring coordination or exchange of information about conditions. Personal topics are discussed less frequently and usually only among those with close family connections or long associations. Privacy is respected through avoiding questions about matters not voluntarily shared by individuals during normal interactions observed. Information spreads gradually through casual mention during encounters rather than through deliberate distribution or announcement to groups. The pace of information flow is slow but adequate for the types of news relevant to daily life. Cooperation happens when tasks exceed the capacity of individual households to complete alone within reasonable time frames required. Multiple families work together during harvest when crops must be gathered quickly before weather damages them significantly. Building projects benefit from shared labor when heavy materials must be moved or lifted into position safely. The cooperation is reciprocal and those who receive help provide it to others when their turn comes around. Obligations are remembered informally and fulfilled without need for formal accounting or record keeping between participants involved. The system functions through mutual understanding and shared expectations maintained across the community over long periods of time. Disputes are rare because boundaries and responsibilities are well established through long tradition and general acceptance. When disagreements arise, they are usually resolved through discussion among those directly involved without outside intervention needed. Elders may be consulted when agreement cannot be reached between the parties in direct conflict with each other. Decisions made by respected elders are generally accepted and implemented without further dispute or resistance from those involved. The goal is restoration of normal functioning rather than punishment or assignment of blame to individuals specifically responsible. Resolution allows work to continue and relationships to be maintained despite the temporary disruption caused by disagreement. Tasks are performed with minimal variation from previous performances of the same activities done before countless times. The body moves through familiar motions that require no conscious direction or attention from the mind engaged. Hands grasp tools in the same way and apply pressure in amounts learned through extended practice over years. Steps are taken in sequences that have become automatic through repetition until awareness is no longer needed. The work proceeds steadily without acceleration or slowing beyond what physical tiredness naturally imposes over time. Completion happens when the task reaches its natural endpoint rather than when a predetermined amount of effort has been expended. Watching occurs during periods when active work is not required but presence is necessary for supervision purposes. I scan the area periodically but focus on nothing specific unless movement or change draws attention briefly. Thoughts drift without subject or direction during the long periods of inactivity between moments requiring action. Time passes without awareness of its duration, and surprise sometimes occurs when shadows indicate more time has elapsed. The watching is passive rather than active and requires minimal mental engagement from the person performing it. Interruptions are infrequent and the stillness becomes a form of rest despite the body remaining upright and awake. Maintenance work addresses deterioration that occurs continuously despite efforts to prevent or slow the processes involved naturally. Wood dries and cracks as moisture content changes with variations in humidity and temperature over seasons. Metal corrodes when exposed to water and air, creating rust that weakens the material gradually over extended periods. Fabric wears thin in areas of repeated friction and eventually develops holes that expand with continued use. The maintenance is reactive rather than preventive and addresses problems after they become visible and noticeable to observers. Prevention is limited to basic practices like keeping things dry or applying oil to surfaces periodically when remembered. Adjustments are made to accommodate changing conditions without fundamentally altering the underlying approach to tasks being performed. More water is carried when heat increases, evaporation rates and consumption by people and animals rises accordingly. Less fuel is used when temperatures warm and heating demands decrease for maintaining comfortable conditions indoors overnight. Clothing is changed to lighter or heavier weight materials as seasons transition between warm and cold periods. The adjustments are incremental and occur gradually rather than through sudden complete changes in practice or method. Reverting to previous conditions happens when seasonal patterns cycle back to earlier states already experienced before. Checking involves verifying that conditions remain as expected without necessarily taking action to modify anything observed during inspection. Stores are examined to confirm supplies remain adequate for anticipated needs in the period ahead before next replenishment. Fences are walked to identify damage requiring repair, though the repairs may be postponed until later when time allows. Animals are observed to ensure they appear healthy and are behaving in ways considered normal for their species. The checking provides reassurance that intervention is not immediately needed and current arrangements remain functional for now. Action is triggered only when observations indicate deviation from acceptable ranges of normal variation previously established. Redoing occurs when previous work proves inadequate or when conditions change requiring fresh application of effort to maintain function. Patched areas sometimes fail and must be patched again with new material applied over the failed previous repair. Sharpened tools become dull again and require resharpening using the same methods applied before to restore cutting ability. Cleaned areas accumulate new dirt and must be cleaned again in cycles that repeat endlessly without permanent resolution. The repetition is accepted as natural and does not generate frustration or desire for more permanent solutions. Each iteration is performed with the same care as the previous one without sense of futility or wasted effort. Continuing describes the ongoing nature of most work which lacks clear completion points or final states to be achieved. Weeding happens continuously throughout growing seasons as new plants sprout in areas previously cleared of competing vegetation. Firewood is gathered year-round to maintain supplies that are constantly depleted through daily burning for heat and cooking. Water is carried in daily cycles that never end as long as people and animals require it for survival. The work is understood as perpetual and necessary rather than as temporary or as leading toward a finished condition. Acceptance of the continuous nature allows the work to proceed without expectation of eventual cessation or relief from duty. Maintaining involves keeping systems functioning at adequate levels without pursuing improvement or optimization beyond current performance standards. Fires are kept burning at levels sufficient for cooking and warmth but not necessarily at optimal efficiency of fuel use. Tools are kept sharp enough to perform required tasks but not necessarily at the keenest edge possible through extended effort. Clothing is kept clean enough to be wearable but not necessarily at the highest standard of cleanliness achievable through additional labor. The standard is adequacy rather than excellence, and this moderate goal is generally achieved through routine efforts applied. Exceeding minimal standards happens occasionally but is not systematically pursued as an objective in itself worthy of effort. Motions are repeated in identical patterns each time a task is performed regardless of context or specific conditions present. Stirring happens with the same circular motion at the same speed regardless of what is being stirred. Sweeping follows the same path across floors and uses the same length strokes throughout the entire process each time. Carrying uses the same grips and body positions to distribute weight in ways that minimize strain and fatigue. The consistency of motion creates efficiency through eliminating need for decision-making or adjustment during execution of familiar tasks. Variation is minimal and occurs only when obstacles force deviation from the established pattern temporarily until they can be bypassed. Perform describes actions that are executed without emotional engagement or sense of personal investment in outcomes achieved. The tasks are done because they need doing rather than from desire or interest in the activity itself. Completion brings no satisfaction beyond the knowledge that the task is finished and attention can shift to the next required activity. Failure brings no particular disappointment but simply necessitates additional attempts until success is achieved eventually through continued effort. The emotional neutrality allows work to proceed steadily without the energy fluctuations that come from varying levels of enthusiasm or discouragement experienced. Without generates descriptions that define activities by what they lack rather than by what they contain or produce. Work proceeds without conversation when talking is unnecessary for coordination or when no one feels inclined to speak. Movement happens without haste when there is no particular reason to hurry despite work remaining to be completed. Eating occurs without pleasure when food is merely functional fuel rather than something enjoyed for flavor or variety. The absences are not experienced as deprivations but simply as neutral characteristics of the activities being undertaken regularly. Attention focuses on presence rather than absence, and what exists occupies awareness more than what does not exist currently. Thought diminishes during extended periods of repetitive physical labor that requires no problem-solving or decision-making input. The mind becomes quiet and mental activity reduces to near stillness while the body continues working automatically through learned patterns. Awareness remains but is diffuse and unfocused rather than concentrated on any particular object or subject matter considered. Time passes unnoticed and surprise occurs when tasks complete or when external interruptions indicate duration that was not tracked consciously. The mental rest provided by mindless physical work is restorative and allows recovery from periods requiring concentration or careful attention to details noticed. Familiarity with environment and tasks creates comfort through elimination of uncertainty and unpredictability from daily experience encountered. Every object has a known location and finding things requires no searching or conscious recall of placement. Every path is known in complete detail and walking requires no attention to navigation or route selection. Every task follows known steps and execution requires no planning or consideration of methods to be employed. The deep familiarity eliminates cognitive load and allows functioning with minimal mental effort expended during most activities. Change is rare enough that adaptation is infrequent and most days proceed within the realm of complete familiarity established. Physical sensations become background after extended exposure and cease to register consciously unless they intensify beyond normal ranges. The ache of tired muscles is constant during work and fades from awareness until rest brings relief. The smell of smoke and animals fills the air continuously and becomes unnoticeable to those immersed in the environment. The texture of rough clothing against skin is present but ignored as attention focuses elsewhere during daily activities. The sensations exist but do not occupy conscious awareness unless they change suddenly or intensify to levels demanding attention through discomfort or pain experienced. Expected conditions generate no reaction when they occur as anticipated based on past experience with similar situations. Rain during wet seasons is noted but causes no surprise or emotional response beyond practical adjustments to work plans. Cold during winter months is accepted as normal and preparations are made without complaint about the conditions imposed. Hunger before meals is anticipated and tolerated without distress until food becomes available for consumption shortly afterward. The expectations are accurate enough that most experiences fall within predicted ranges and require no special processing or emotional response. Routines continue in the same manner as they have continued for as long as anyone can remember clearly. Each day resembles the previous day in all essential aspects that define the experience of living. Morning arrives and the same actions are performed in the same sequence they were performed yesterday. Fires are started using methods that have been used countless times before without variation or innovation. Water is fetched from the same sources along the same paths walked repeatedly over many years. Food is prepared using the same ingredients combined in the same ways that produce familiar results. Tasks are completed and then require doing again as conditions return to states that necessitate repetition. Floors are swept clean and then accumulate dirt that must be swept again the following day. Clothes are washed and then become dirty again through wearing and must be washed once more. Animals are fed and then become hungry again, requiring feeding at the next regular interval established. The cycle repeats without end and without expectation that it will ever cease or chon. Fundamentally, acceptance of the perpetual nature allows the work to continue without resistance or frustration developing over time. Seasons change and bring variations in temperature and precipitation that affect some aspects of daily work. Planting happens during one season and harvesting during another season several months later in the cycle. Cold weather requires more firewood and warmer clothing than hot weather when less is needed for comfort. Rain affects the timing of outdoor work but does not eliminate the necessity of completing required tasks. The variations are predictable and preparations are made based on experience of previous cycles already completed. Each year resembles previous years in the pattern of seasonal changes that occur regularly and reliably. People age gradually and their roles shift as physical capabilities change over the course of many years. Children grow and take on more responsibilities as they become capable of performing tasks independently without supervision. Adults continue working until age or illness reduces their capacity and others assume their duties naturally. The transitions happen slowly and are not marked by ceremonies or formal transfers of responsibility between individuals. Work continues regardless of who performs it and the tasks remain essentially unchanged across the generations passing. Knowledge is transferred through observation and participation rather than through explanation or written instruction provided formally. Children watch adults performing tasks and imitate the motions they observe until proficiency develops through practice. Corrections are made when errors occur, but detailed explanations are rare, and learning happens primarily through doing. The methods passed down are the same methods that were passed down to the current generation from those before. Changes are minimal and innovations are uncommon, as traditional ways are preferred and maintained without question. Days pass without distinct markers to separate one from another in memory or experience of those living. The passage of time is noted through seasonal cycles rather than through counting individual days sequentially. Events occur but are not recorded, and memories fade until only the general patterns remain clear. What happened yesterday blends with what happened last week and what happened last month in recollection. The lack of distinction between days creates a sense of continuity rather than of progression through time. Work proceeds at steady pace determined by the physical capabilities of those performing the labor involved. Rushing is rare and occurs only when weather or other conditions create urgency requiring faster completion. Most work is done at speeds that can be maintained for extended periods without exhaustion or injury. The pace is sustainable and allows for working throughout the daylight hours available without excessive fatigue. Rest periods are taken when needed, and work resumes when energy is sufficient to continue safely. Activities are performed because they need performing rather than from any sense of purpose beyond the immediate practical necessity. Fields are worked to produce food that sustains life through the coming months until the next harvest. Animals are tended to provide milk, eggs, and meat that supplement the diet throughout the year. Clothing is made and repaired to protect bodies from weather and to meet basic standards of modesty. The reasons are practical and immediate rather than abstract or directed toward distant goals beyond current needs. Conditions are maintained rather than improved, as the focus is on preserving current function adequately without pursuing enhancement. Structures are repaired when damage occurs to keep them weatherproof and habitable for continued use. Tools are maintained to keep them functional for the tasks they were designed to perform originally. Food is preserved to extend its usability but not to improve its flavor or nutritional qualities. The goal is continuation of current states rather than progression toward improved future conditions not yet achieved. Background conditions persist without change and form the constant environment within which daily activities occur. The landscape remains the same with fields, forests, and water sources in fixed locations known to all. The community consists of the same families living in proximity and interacting regularly through shared work and resources. The methods of working and living continue as they have continued without significant alteration over long periods. The constancy provides stability and eliminates uncertainty from most aspects of daily experience encountered routinely. Sameness characterizes most experiences and reduces the need for attention or conscious processing during activities performed. The familiar requires less mental energy than the novel and allows functioning with minimal cognitive effort expended. Recognition is immediate and automatic for all objects, places, and tasks encountered during normal daily rounds. Decisions are minimal because choices have been made previously and become standard responses to recurring situations. The efficiency of the familiar allows work to proceed smoothly without hesitation or deliberation slowing progress. Physical sensations persist at levels that fade into background awareness during extended exposure over time passing. Tiredness accumulates during work and becomes constant companion that is noticed but not focused upon consciously. Hunger develops before meals and is satisfied afterward in cycles that repeat throughout each day predictably. Temperature fluctuations are felt but adjusted to through adding or removing clothing as conditions change. The sensations exist continuously but occupy attention only when they intensify beyond normal ranges experienced regularly. Movement continues through spaces that have been traversed so many times that navigation is automatic without conscious direction. Paths are walked while thoughts drift elsewhere, and arrival happens without awareness of the journey completed. Hands reach for tools without looking and find them in expected locations where they are always kept. Bodies adjust to obstacles and uneven ground without visual attention directed downward toward feet moving. The automatic nature of movement allows mental rest during physical activity that requires no conscious control. Tasks blend together in memory until individual instances are indistinguishable from one another in recollection attempted. Yesterday's work resembles today's work, which will resemble tomorrow's work in all important respects noted. The repetition creates continuity that extends forward and backward in time without clear boundaries between periods. What is happening now has happened before and will happen again in the future, continuing indefinitely. The pattern persists and provides structure to existence without requiring planning or anticipation of change ahead. Time moves forward, but the content of days remains largely unchanged, creating experience of duration without progression. Seasons cycle and return to previous conditions in patterns that repeat annually without fundamental alteration observed. Years accumulate, but life continues in the same manner it has always continued for those living. The passage of time is measured but does not bring transformation of the basic patterns established. Continuity persists and the familiar reproduces itself through repetition that extends without foreseeable endpoint. Ongoing conditions continue as they have continued and as they will continue into the future ahead indefinitely. Work is done and then must be done again as conditions return to states requiring attention. Maintenance preserves current function without creating anything new or different from what existed previously before. Tasks are performed repeatedly in cycles that have no completion but only continuation through time passing. The rhythm persists and life proceeds within patterns established long ago and maintained through constant repetition. Days follow days and seasons follow seasons in succession that continues without variation or interruption expected.